Good evening, everyone. So welcome to HEYA Inc. Advanced Industries Fireside Chat 1. Trump 2.0, Navigating US Malaysia Diplomatic Relations, Trade Risks, and Tech Opportunities. So before we go into these exciting fireside chats with our subject matter experts, so we just want to have a real quick introduction about HEYA Inc. So we are non-profit think tanks and people's training academies that envisage to catalyze policy ideation through transformative developments and diverse participations. So we conduct research and devise sustainable policy framework through the lens of community. We also provide transformative learning and development opportunities to the community. And last but not least, we form a community advocacy coalitions to snowball policies reform momentums. So currently, our policy focus is on targeted subsidies framework and advanced industries, as well as education reform that encompasses the higher education's blueprint and new form of classroom learning. Okay, so welcome everyone again to our fireside chats. So the Trump second presidency has brought along unprecedented disruptions to global diplomatic relations, trade, and technology developments. In less than 2 months into Trump 2.0, the status quo of diplomatic relations has been reversed, if not shattered. He has brought along an unpredicted, most of the time flip-flopping trade tariff and sanctions, not just to global competing rivalries such as China, but to traditional allies including Canada's, Mexico's, and Europe's. Now, in terms of technology, Trump has started the technology sanctions and tariff to China in his first presidency, ultimately leading to a massive outflow of multinational technology companies manufacturing from China to Southeast Asia and Mexico. Now, it is foreseen that Trump will escalate the technology aggressions in order to realize the Make in America dream and to make America great again. Now, Malaysia being one of the countries most benefited from the Trump first presidency sanctions against China, is currently in a critical crossroad under the global ecosystem disrupted by Trump's second presidencies. Now, as reported by the media, our Prime Minister, who's also the ASEAN chairman, has yet to get an opportunity to engage directly with President Trump, signifying a diplomatic downfall. Now, in terms of global trade, Malaysia has the third largest trade deficit with US among ASEAN countries, which signal a possible tariff if the wave would reach this region. As for advanced technology, the US technology MNC has become the crucial backbone for our advanced industrial endeavor, and we cannot risk any possible outflow in order for us to continue to develop. So here we are, together with three subject matter experts, to discuss these three critical aspects of Trump's second presidency, most concerning Malaysia's diplomacy, trades, and technologies. I would like to welcome all three panelists. So our first panelist of the day, Professor Dr. Ong Kian Ming. Professor Dr. Ong Kian Ming is the Pro-Vice Chancellor for External Engagement of Taylor's Universities. He served as the Member of Parliament for Bangi from May 2018 to November 2022, and Sedang from May 2013 to May 2018. And he is also the former Deputy Minister of Industrial Trade and Industry in the first Pakatan Harapan administrations. Currently, he is a board member of Malaysia's Investment Development Authority, MIDA, and also the visiting senior fellow of ICS Yusof Ishak Institute, Singapore. He runs the Are We OK podcast that discuss domestics and global social economics and politics issues. He is a Fulbright scholar who graduated from the Duke Universities with a PhD in political science. Welcome, Professor Dr. Ong Kian Ming. Thanks for coming to this fireside chat.
Thanks for having me.
Right. So our second panelist is Mr. Jaideep Singh. Mr. Jaideep Singh is currently the analyst of Institute of Strategics and International Studies, ISIS, Malaysia. Jaideep's research institute lie in industrial and trade policies. His public policy experience runs the gamut from national planning in Zanzibar, Tanzania, as an Overseas Development Institute fellow to assisting in the formulations of Malaysia's new Industrial Master Plan 2030. He's also no stranger to the think tank scene, having authored op-eds and contribute comments on trades, fiscal policies, and the labor markets to local and regional media outlets. Jaideep holds an master's in economics from the University of Cambridge and a bachelor's in economics from the University of Warwick. Welcome, Mr. Jadip. Thanks for coming over here.
Thank you for having me, Sahar.
Yeah. Last but not least, Dr. Sri Wong Siu Hai. Dr. Sri Wong Siu Hai is the president of Malaysia's Semiconductor Industrial Associations and a champion of the E&E Productivity Nexus. He is a member of Bermuda, a public-private sector special task force to facilitate business and improve Malaysia's global competitiveness. Dr. Sri Wong served Intel for 37 years. His last position with Intel was Vice President of Technology and Manufacturing Group and General Managers of Assembly and Test Manufacturing, responsible for global assembly test factories worldwide. He was the chairman for Malaysia's American Electronic Industry, a committee under NCAM, for 15 years until 2021. Welcome, Dr. Sri. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Right. So, without further ado, I would go straight away into the very insightful discussions that we're going to have today. So, let's start with the diplomatic sections in this fireside chat. So, the Prime Minister's Anwar Ibrahim might have been reprimanded by US President Donald Trump if a phone call has been arranged between them, according to the former ambassador Nasri Aziz. So this is one of the critical contexts given by our former ambassadors to the United States. So I think at first I would like to address these questions to Professors Dr. Ong Kian Min. So do you actually agree with these statements? And what is our status of diplomatic relations with the US under the Trump second presidency that leads our former ambassadors to come out with such a critical statements?
Yeah, thanks for the first question. I think what made the former ambassador, Dr. Sri Nazri, say that is because of the very strong position that Prime Minister Anwar has taken with regards to what's happening in Gaza, and specifically his strong support and connections with Hamas. That was the reason given as to why that phone call could not be arranged. I'm not sure to what extent that is really a valid reason for in terms of looking at it from two angles. Firstly, a lot of other leaders, including President Prabowo of Indonesia, managed to get a phone call with President Trump when he was president-elect, even though Indonesia also has very strong diplomatic position that's taken against against Israel on the Gaza issue. That's one. Second thing is, I think it's important to note that Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN. And we can easily or should be able to leverage that into at least a phone call with either the president-elect or later on President Trump in terms of trying to engage with the Trump administration wearing the ASEAN chair hat. So I think both are opportunities, and sadly they were missed opportunities. Maybe because of miscommunication, or maybe because the former ambassador Nazri did not do the necessary legwork in order to facilitate that kind of engagement.
So if I were to just ask, if let's say 1 to 10, 1 being worse and 10 being the best, what is our state of diplomatic relations with US? How would you rate it? And how do you think that we could possibly reconcile the possible, perceptions of US having on Malaysia?
I don't think I would use the word reconcile because I would say that our relationship with the US is still very good from investment and even from a security perspective because our armed forces, whether it's the army or the navy, still has very close relationship with the security establishment in the US. If I were to rate the current situation, maybe it's 4 out of 10. But there are opportunities for further engagement this year, especially as ASEAN chair. But right now, we're not quite sure as to what the strategy for engagement is, especially since we do not have an ambassador in the US. And that kind of position is very important, to fill. And it would have been better if we had filled it almost immediately after Nazri's term expired. Because if we want to organize something like the proposed ASEAN-US summit that was brought up by the foreign minister, it is crucial for us to have an active ambassador in Washington, D.C. Right now, we don't even have that.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. Yeah, Mr. Jaideep, do you have anything pops up pertaining to this focus in terms of US Malaysia's bilateral relations?
Well, first, thank you for having me. But I think I won't dwell too much on the purely hypothetical, notion that he might have been reprimanded because it just never happened. So I think it's completely speculative. So rather than dwelling on the the phone call and whether it should have happened, whether it could have happened. Let's focus more on the current state of play. I think, as Prof. Ong mentioned, from an economic perspective, Malaysia and the US still maintain quite close ties, and I think that's important to emphasize. In terms of trade, for instance, the relative share of bilateral relations between Malaysia and the US actually grew in the last few years. As a share of Malaysia's total trade. The US is, remains our third largest partner, but its relative importance has actually grown in the last few years. While China, despite being the largest trading partner, has actually seen its share of Malaysia's total trade decline. So, what this goes to show is that the US is still an important partner to Malaysia from an economic perspective, and we know that the US is also a major source of foreign direct investment, particularly into the semiconductor industry. So I think what we should focus on now is to sort of leverage the low hanging fruit and try to use existing institutions that are already in place to strengthen relations. For instance, there was a memorandum of cooperation signed on semiconductors between Malaysia and the US in 2022. There's also the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, which perhaps may be the fate of that framework may be sort of uncertain now with the Trump administration, but the fact remains is that it still exists as a potential sort of instrument. So I think it's better to take it's not necessarily there's still many sort of institutions that we can leverage on despite the disruptive factor that is Trump, particularly from an economic perspective.
Right, thanks.
May I add a couple of points here?
Sure. Yeah, I
You know,
was about to direct the questions to you, Dr. Sri.
Okay, all right. The US invested in Malaysia since 1972, and a lot of companies have been in Malaysia since then, 30, 40 years already. And they have been growing and growing and growing. And I mean, recently Intel announced the 7.1 billion investment, although it's on pause kind of now, and TI invested, and so many other companies, US companies that invested in Malaysia. So the experience in Malaysia has been very positive. Okay, so if you look at the investment, US is the largest investor in the country, in our country. Now, with that positive experience, other than what Professor Ong said about the issue of Gaza, since then, I think the messages are toned down recently. So I hope things are getting better with that messaging.
So yeah, thanks, Dr. Sri, for the top up. So talking about messagings, so when we come to this point, talking about messagings, I found Malaysia's geopolitical position sometimes is very confusing because I think we observe that Malaysia are having a deeper tie with US, with Russia. Previously, in terms of BRICS, and I think recently in terms of defense, when we see the defense secretaries, is actually visiting Malaysia. The former defense secretaries is actually visiting Malaysia and have a discussion with our defense ministers, Dr. Sri Khalid Nordin. So why is this happening? Of course, someone was skeptically saying that Anwar was trying to have a call with Trump through Putin, although it's a joke, but it kind of bring up a lot of questions. So I'm not sure whether any of our panelists today would like to top up a little bit on this. Maybe we go
I
with
can. Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. I think the likelihood of Prime Minister Anwar relying more on former Thai Prime Minister Thaksin to reach out to President Trump is probably higher than using President Putin as a channel. So but I think it maybe brings up an interesting point since you brought up President Putin. Given the fact that Prime Minister Anwar has invited President Putin to come and attend the ASEAN summit that will be held at the end of the year, it may be an interesting proposition to get Trump's attention to offer to host a meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Malaysia. And this is something that is not foreign to President Trump. He came to Southeast Asia twice during his first presidency, first time to Singapore and the other time to Vietnam, both for the same reasons, which was to engage with the North Korean leader, President Kim Jong-un. So, why not host the two of them for a summit in Malaysia during the ASEAN summit?
Interesting. That is really a great opportunities and nice possibilities. Yeah. Mr. Jaideep and Dr. Sri, do you have anything further to talk about this? Perhaps if I were to drag a little bit in terms of BRICS, do you think BRICS will kind of offset or to help Malaysia's to if let's say our diplomatic relations with US is kind of in jeopardy, will BRICS kind of offset the risk, the trade risk imposed by the US? Do you think that would help?
Well, if I may, first you mentioned that Malaysia's geopolitical positioning is quote unquote confusing, but I think that might be a bit of an oversimplification because geopolitics is inherently confusing. And it's not necessarily, it's not a binary situation. There are many different players, in the scene, and it's not necessarily a sort of a zero-sum game where if you deepen relations with one, you're, jeopardizing your relationship with the other. And I think Malaysia is trying to sort of maintain that balance as much as it can. And I think it did quite well during Trump 1.0, of course, managing to be a sort of bystander economy that benefited quite well from the diversion of trade, from China, the China plus one factor and everything. That seems to be the sort of direction that we are, continuing to pursue this time around, although perhaps it might be more difficult if Trump becomes more aggressive and potentially starts to target third-party countries, not just targeting China, but also other countries that, perhaps want to in the mix. That remains to be seen. But I think going back to your point about BRICS, I think first of all, it's important to remember that BRICS represents an attempt by Malaysia to return to the importance of the Global South agenda, which is not actually new for Malaysia. That was in the 90s, as recently as the 90s, we were quite active on this front in terms of investing in frontier economies like many countries in sub-Saharan Africa as well as India and so on. But that sort of kind of went, we lost focus of that quite more recently. But now there seems to be there's an interest in trying to return to that. And this is important because the Global South has grown in terms of economic size and prominence. UNCTAD recently released a report saying that South-South trade flows actually exceed North-South flows now. So I think the importance of the Global South can't be dismissed, and BRICS is simply one way to solidify that relationship. And I think also people focus so much on the BRICS membership and not necessarily the other consequential developments that happened on the sidelines. For instance, last year, not only did we, sort of show interest in joining BRICS, but we also deepened our semiconductor relationship with Brazil, signing MOUs with similar institutions in Brazil that also do research into IC design. At the same time, we also elevated ties with India, to a comprehensive strategic partnership, which includes ways to strengthen collaboration in semiconductors. And we are seeing that in practice. Like Kilterra is working with IIT Madras, which is one of the foremost institutions in the world in the sort of software development. So I think what this goes to show is that I think Malaysia's sort of interest in BRICS doesn't necessarily detract from it doesn't necessarily mean that we're anti-West. I think it's simply a form of diversification. I think what Trump has taught us is that diversification should be at the forefront of our agenda. That we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket, because we risk, if things go south, that could affect our, sort of like revenue flows and export revenue and so on. But by having a larger basket of sort of goods and countries to trade with, that also deepens, it strengthens our resilience.
All right. Any top-ups from Prof and Dr. Sri for that? Yep.
Yes, I'd like to add because I'm in it with Brazil. Malaysia, as you know, as I mentioned earlier, have more than 50 years of experience, and we have grown from 230 million in 1972 in terms of export ringgit, 230 to now 600 billion in terms of export from the E&E industry in 2024. So a lot of countries really wanted to know how did this happen, okay? And they want to have a piece of that pie, so to speak, because the global semiconductor industry is expected to grow to 1 trillion by 2030 from 600 billion US dollars. So if we had at least 2-3 roundtables with Brazil, with the ambassador before he left, and then that culminated to the MOU signing, which I was there, was in Rio, signing the MOU with 2 of the E&E association. And I was there, I found out that they actually started the semiconductor industry quite early as well in the 1980s. But along the way, I guess they have some problems. But if you look at the export, we are about 80 billion US dollars, and they are in semiconductor, and they are about 1.8 billion. They are really looking at how do I grow this in Brazil and hoping to be the gateway to the America. So in terms of semiconductor, we have met 22 countries last year talking of some level of collaboration. So one of them was UK. We had 2-3 roundtables with UK, meetings with their research centers, and culminated again to 2 trips to UK. And now we signed 2 MOUs with the 2 of their institutions research institutions in UK, working on technology development. I studied in UK. I never knew UK had that technology. So again, there are many countries talking to us. So we talk to everybody, hoping to either collaborate in technology or helping the other country to grow their semiconductor industry, or hoping to attract them to come to Malaysia to invest. So there are many things that's happening around there.
Thanks, Dr. Sri. And Prof, I know you have quite some engagement with the former Brazilian ambassadors to Malaysia, and looking on Trump's aggressions over threatenings on if BRICS did come up with currencies, then Trump's will definitely retaliate with that. So what's your take about Malaysia's roles and also pro and cons to be in the BRICS bloc?
Firstly, on the specific issue of the Trump threat, I don't think any BRICS country is trying to propose a single currency to replace the replace the US dollar. I think what some BRICS countries are trying to do is to create different payment channels in case for some reason they are locked out of certain payment channels, such as SWIFT, for example. They have other ways to do these international settlements. I think from that perspective, whether or not Malaysia is in BRICS, we should be open to such alternative payment channels. Of course, we don't have to try to shout about it and to really say that this is our preferred alternative, but it is something that we should take note of. And then at the same time, we should also continue to quietly pursue settlement in currencies other than the US with some of our major trading partners, so that we can decrease the reliance and even costs in terms of settling in US dollars. So I think that effort will continue, and I don't think our participation in BRICS should derail or should expedite that process.
Thanks. Very interesting inputs in terms of US Malaysia's bilateral relationships. So I think probably let's go to the second sections, which I think will be a real important focus of the discussion of today. So Trump has demonstrated a flip-flop policies making in terms of trade tariff, but we have seen President Trump has since imposed tariff on Canada, on Mexico, and in Europe. So the questions over here for Malaysia is, since we are the countries with the third highest trade deficit with US among ASEAN countries, do you think we would be on the target list of President Trump? So, and what is the impact to our industry, especially high-tech industries? So, probably I'll direct this question first to Dr. Sri Wong.
Yeah, okay. I think we cannot predict what President Trump is going to do. One day he said 25%, another day he said 10%, and so on. And it's supposed to happen on April 2nd. And today we're very close to that date. Nothing has been announced. But then I can tell you that currently there are a lot of people looking at Malaysia, okay? Because Malaysia announced that we are neutral, non-aligned, and therefore they have high confidence that having more investment in Malaysia or working with Malaysia will help them. But if President Trump is going to put, let's say, 10% across all the countries that he considered as tier 2, then actually there's no significant impact because everybody else is the same. All right. So the only issue is you want to put 25% on Malaysia and 10% on somebody else, and then that will be a significant impact. I doubt that will happen because we have so many big US companies, the Silicon Valley companies here in Malaysia, and then you mentioned just now we are the third in terms of trade deficit. So therefore, I think it will be okay. But currently, lots of interest in Malaysia to move products, to invest, and so on. So we will see.
Thanks, Dr. Sri. So, yeah, Mr. Jadid, do you want to top up on that?
Yeah, sure. I think Dr. Sri really hit the nail on the head there when he talked about the idea that when it comes to Trump, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. But I think it's also important to kind of put the trade deficit in perspective. You mentioned that Malaysia has the third largest trade deficit among ASEAN countries. But if you look globally, I mean, the US trades with many nations, not just nations in ASEAN. And Malaysia actually barely cracks the America's list of 20 largest trading partners. It's number 19. And also, I would say that Malaysia is not really on Trump's radar at the moment. Trump is quite distracted by the trade war with China, and now also turning his back, quote unquote, on Canada and Mexico. Sort of trying to imposing tariffs on them, and also announce that the EU would be his next target. So I think Malaysia is still, not very high on his priority list, and I think that's good. That's good news, at least for now. And also, just to highlight that in terms of the composition of trade, when we look at exports, America's exports to ASEAN countries and America's imports from ASEAN countries, while in absolute terms, Malaysia has a third highest trade deficit, but in relative terms, as a share of total trade, Malaysia is actually only number 7. So that means that we actually still import quite a lot from the US. It's unlike some other countries like Vietnam, for instance. Vietnam has a very big trade surplus, against the US. And I think more than 80% of trade between US and Vietnam involves the US importing from Vietnam. So I think maybe Vietnam might be higher on his list if we were to speculate. Vietnam actually exports 12 times as much to the US as it imports. And for Malaysia, it's 2.5 times as much. And just to kind of reiterate what Dato Sri Wong said, when he mentioned the idea that, that it really depends on the sort of tariffs that are imposed. I think, for instance, Trump mentioned a month ago that he was planning on introducing tariffs on all semiconductor imports. If this is a blanket sort of tariff, that is, as Dr. Sri mentioned, if it's across all countries, 10% or 25%, whatever it is, then we would expect pretty much, like there will be a negative, as we call it in economics, a negative income effect, because the prices are going to be more expensive in the US. So that means, consumer demand will be less. Consumers will have companies will have lower purchasing power. So you might expect some dampening of, trade. But in terms of the substitution effect, that is, how competitive would Malaysia's exports of semiconductors, for instance, to the US be? There won't be any difference because all countries are subject to the same tariffs. So I would expect, yes, there may be some decline in trade if he were to go ahead with blanket tariffs, but in the short term, probably not significant. And I also think it's highly unlikely that he would impose targeted tariffs on Malaysia, like targeting Malaysia specifically, just because we are not a major, like a very big trading partner of the US, like compared to even like countries like Vietnam. Of course, if you look at the medium term or the long term, it would depend on also how much of production, for instance, in the semiconductor supply chain is reshored into the US. Like the state of American industrial policy, subsidies offered to US companies, and so on. But it's very uncompetitive compared to importing from places like in Southeast Asia. So I don't expect it to be to be a really significant impact.
Thanks, Mr. Jadid. Prof. Ong, I would just want to ask your opinions pertaining to this, but I also want to top up a little bit context. So what you think Malaysian ASEAN chairmanship would help in terms of circumventing such a risk? Would it provide more leverage when it comes to trade tariff negotiation for Malaysia? If there is a possibility, we need to go to that as an ASEAN and bloc.
Yeah, very good question. I think there are two approaches that Malaysia and other ASEAN countries can take, and they can be taken simultaneously. So one action would be one that's more focused on, our own country response, meaning Malaysia has to put something on the table that would be of interest to the Trump administration. So what would this entail? This would entail, for example, a commitment to invest in certain segments of the US economy. And perhaps secondly would be a commitment to buy more US goods. So for Malaysia, it could be our oil and gas companies like Petronas wanting to say, I'm going to invest in the shale industry in the US as a way of getting more diversified access to oil and gas resources in the US, and to show Trump that we're committed to putting money into the US ecosystem. And he likes the term drill, baby, drill, right? So that could be one commitment or one example. The other one would be to commit to buying more goods produced in the US, such as planes made by Boeing. Our airlines, both public and private, can participate in this, and also a commitment to perhaps buy more armaments from US companies, if that's something that is being considered by the Ministry of Defense. So that's the more focused approach in terms of country approach. In terms of what ASEAN can offer, I think one of the things that ASEAN should seriously consider and put on the table would be putting the offer of negotiating a free trade agreement with the US. And why is that, I think, a timely offer? Because when you talk about reciprocal tariffs, right, it's basically saying that, I'm going to charge a similar tariff in terms of what you are charging me. And if let's say we're going to have a common unified front and say that we want to negotiate tariffs downwards in terms of us accessing the US market and US accessing the ASEAN market, this could be, a good tactic for us to get Trump's interest and maybe delay some of these punitive tariffs that may hit the region and also the rest of the world in early April. So that is the two approach that I would recommend that we take.
Thanks, Prof, for your insightful analysis. So we talk about tariff, we talk about what we can offer to the US. I think it will comes to another very critical context in terms of semiconductor manufacturing in Malaysia. So we see during Trump's first presidency, when he imposed tariff on China, there's a lot of semiconductor manufacturing MNC outflow from China, and then it comes to this region, especially in Vietnam and Malaysia, and in specifically in Penang. So if I were to speculate, if this time Trump were to impose tariff in this region or in a blanket tariff globally, so do you think it is possible to force these manufacturing facilities to be shipped out from Malaysia again, just like what happened to China in 2019? I think I will first direct this question to W3, since you are in this field.
Okay. Short term, I don't see it happening. First of all, we are not in the cutting edge wafer fab. They are mainly in US and Taiwan. Then we are limited in terms of the doing assembly tests of high-end computing and AI chip in the country. So the impact, I guess, will be not significant. And now you look at whether there is an alternative. If you've put all this tariff and so on into the country, does US have an alternative, right? Now, in assembly tests, which we have 13% of the capacity, I don't think US have that. I don't think anyone will move to the US because it will just be too expensive. And I don't think it's worthwhile as well to put that kind of facilities in the US because, as you say, it's probably on the lower end of the whole supply chain. Unless you go into the future when you do the high-end advanced packaging, maybe that's a possibility because half of the equipment in that factory will be wafer fab equipment. So I find that it is difficult for the US to say, okay, by doing that, then I'll have more onshoring of factories in the US in assembly tests. And we have tried this possibility 10, 20 years ago in the US, and it just didn't work out. So unless you have newer technology that is higher end in the assembly test world, then that possibility could be there, but not for the short term.
All right, thanks, Dr. Sri. If I were to just again top up the questions for you, so do you foresee the influx of data centers to Malaysia will stop in that if that is the case? Will it affect the influx of data centers to Malaysia?
Well, data centers, is a matter of where you think you want to put your data centers, where you have high confidence of a stable government, business friendly, you have confidence in the country in terms of law and everything else. I think that's the main criteria to me. You can buy servers, high-end AI servers from anywhere in the world. Data centers can be placed anywhere in the world. So they have chosen Malaysia for a few reasons. I think one of them was the neutral, non-aligned, that Malaysia have declared. And of course, all the other incentives that we are given to them, power and water. So I don't see it happening unless something else happens.
All right. So it seems that we are still in a pretty secure situations from what you mentioned, Dr. Sris. Prof. Ong, if I were to ask you in terms of government policies, so if there is a threat in terms of tariffs is in front of Malaysians, do you think there is a need to adjustment in terms of government policy, especially on the national semiconductors strategy that has been announced last year? What should the government do? Oops.
Yeah, you're asking Prof or you're asking who?
I'm asking Prof. Yeah, Prof. Prof. Ong.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was distracted just now. Somebody walked past.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. No, it's okay.
So, yeah, can you just quickly repeat the question? Apologies.
Yeah. So my question is talking about if the tariff really come, and in terms of the government policies, how should the government adjust, and what adjustment, especially in terms of the national semiconductor strategies, you foresee is needed?
Yeah. First of all, I think if the tariffs do come, it will not be in a form that differentiates Malaysia with other countries, like what Dr. Sri Wong said just now. So we'll be hit together with other countries around the world, including our ASEAN neighbors. So from that perspective, I don't really think that there's much that we can do, other than maybe some of the more nuanced approaches that we can take from an ASEAN and also country perspective that I mentioned just now. I think regardless of what happens on the tariff side, our national semiconductor strategy needs better policy details to be announced, and also better policy coordination on the part of the stakeholders. So we've seen a little bit of that come out through the signing of the agreement between the Malaysian government and ARM, that will allow Malaysian companies and also other companies that are based in Malaysia, subject to approval, to access some of the IP on chip design for CPUs and GPUs that's being offered by ARM. So what we need to do, and I've spoken to Dr. Sri Wong about this as well, is to make sure, number one, we have a proper filtering and also identification system in terms of which companies are the ones that should have access to this technology in Malaysia. And if, let's say, we do not have enough of such companies, who do we want to attract to set up JVs with Malaysian companies in order to be eligible to access the ARM IP? Second thing is, I think we need to identify possible technology markets, including for local use, so that the IC design can be focused on very specific areas of the larger ecosystem. It cannot be just AI space, that's too general. We need use cases that can be perhaps deployed and then also developed and used in the Malaysian context, right? So maybe more specialized visual graphics processing that's related to drone technology to look at palm oil plantations, for example, right? So that's something that we need to do. So all this kind of policy alignment is something that the larger semiconductor industry needs to undertake in conjunction with together with the government in order to push the whole industry forward.
Thanks, Prof. Yeah, Mr. Jadid, if I were to just go back a little bit to the economic aspect again, so talking about tariff, or even a possible tariff, what will be the effect in short term and long terms to our stock market and exchange rate? Looking at how flip-flop Trump is going on. So yeah.
I think the most sort of obvious impact would be obviously higher prices that consumers would face. Obviously when tariffs go up, the cost of production goes up, so prices would go up. Prices in the US would go up, and obviously that because of higher inflationary pressure, that would prompt probably tighter monetary policy from the Federal Reserve. That means the Federal Reserve probably will impose or introduce higher interest rates to try to reduce the inflation, and that would actually make the US dollar probably stronger against emerging market currencies. So we could potentially see a further weakening of emerging market currencies, including the ringgit, if the current trajectory continues, which actually kind of ironically runs contrary to what Trump wants to do, because Trump wants to quote unquote weaken the US dollar. So yeah, I mean, it remains to be seen what really would happen, but assuming this line of thought, we would likely see higher inflation channeling into higher interest rates and also potentially a weaker ringgit.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Jadid. Yeah, Prof. Ong, you have anything to talk about on this? Since economic is one of your forte here.
I think Jadid described it very well. Nothing to add.
Right. Thanks. Okay, so I think just now we did mention about So it has been made a very huge ceremonies in terms of the collaborations with getting the IPs for chip design. So and the Prime Minister's Anwar Ibrahim actually claimed Malaysia is heading for a fundamental shift in semiconductors and technology. With a move to produce AI chip locally. During the MOU signing with the UK chip architecture company. And just for context to all the audience, so is one of the most important chip design architectures that design most of I think all of your mobile processors for now. So I think I want to direct these questions to the industries. So what is Malaysia's genuine prospect in terms of AI chip design? Because everyone has been talking, yes, Malaysia should go into AI, go into design, fabrication, but what is our genuine prospect, especially in terms of chip design and also advanced packaging and wafer fabrications? Where are we actually?
Okay, in terms of, let's go back to the NSS a bit. So the NSS have this aspiration that would like Malaysia, who have been in the assembly test for more than 50 years, to move up the value chain and into IC design, into advanced packaging, as well as attracting FDI fabs, okay? Because our fabs in the country, we have 5 fabs, but there are different types of fabs compared to logic fabs and the 300mm fab. So we think that if we can attract a fab in that area of 300mm, and especially in the 18 to let's say 40 nanometers, that will be very attractive for Malaysia, because then we would have expanded a new ecosystem for the wafer fab, and that will interweave into the assembly test. So then Malaysia would have become probably the only country in Southeast Asia to have the whole supply chain from IC design all the way to EMS, okay, to E&E industry. So that's one. However, we wanted to go to IC design because of the higher value, and Malaysia has also been So I say it this way, that we tend to be user of technology instead of developer of technology. So the government try to shift this mindset so that we can be developer of technology. And so the approach that government have used ARM is to leapfrog, so to speak, that I'm giving you the IPs and therefore you can have a head start to get IPs and then do your design appropriately. But that doesn't mean that it has to be just AI chip. Of course, AI chip is now the theme of the day, that everybody talks about AI chip. And therefore, to do that, you need a very experienced engineer to do this. Okay. And now, Malaysia, you asked me, do we have it? Yes, we have some, but mainly in the MNC. Okay. We have one company who I think is capable to do this. However, in order for this to take off, we would need the experience of ARM and the other engineers to help our Malaysian engineers in doing it jointly to bring that chip up. So unless you have competent engineers, it's going to be an uphill battle. So we need to find ways how to put all this together so that it can happen.
I see. All right. So if I were to follow up questions, pertaining to this context, so is it actually realistic now to strategize a top-notch chip fabrication factories in Malaysia? Because we see, the Intel advanced packaging plant in Malaysia is just indefinitely halted. What's your opinion, Dato'?
I think to attract a cutting edge fab, I think to me is unlikely, because when they come, they're going to ask for at least 30% from the government for support. And I don't think the government is willing to do that at this point in time. So because a fab like that will be more than 10 billion US dollars, 30% will be 3 billion or more. And that's a lot of money. So we decided that instead of trying to get this cutting edge fab, we look for the next leading edge fab. Okay, that's how I mentioned the 18 to 40 nanometers. However, the other area that we can play is advanced packaging. And that's what we are working closely with the government to figure out how to enable our companies in Malaysia to get into advanced packaging. But advanced packaging are the whole spectrum, the likes of Intel and TSMC, they're talking about the very high-end advanced packaging like 2.5D, 3D. If we can do that, then if Intel hopefully continue with this project, then our engineers will be trained in the higher end advanced packaging, and that will position Malaysia to attract the next high-end fab, so to speak. It may not be cutting-edge fab, but at least a high-end fab. For advanced packaging, about half the equipments are basically fab equipment, and if we can enable this technology in the country, and my aspiration, I tell the government, is that we need to do that so that we can establish Malaysia as the advanced packaging hub for ASEAN. Okay, and we have that opportunity. And so we are now working closely to see how can we make it happen, because we have the people, the talent to make this happen, and we just needed that opportunity. So I hope that will be a reality, hopefully this year or next year.
Yeah, that is a good news. If we are able to go into advanced packaging, that will be an alternative route, which could make Malaysia pretty competitive.
I just qualify, I forgot, because just now I mentioned the whole spectrum, and so we are looking at the middle spectrum. So I call it the sweet spot, where there's higher volume versus, let's say, the AI chip and the high performance chip, computing chip that use 2.5 3D. And I'm not advocating we go there, we leave it to the MNC, and for the Malaysia, we look at the sweet spot in the middle.
All right. Yeah. So let's draw our attention into another, news with regards to AI chip, but this might not be too good of the news for Malaysia. So, for your information, we know that Singapore is actually investigating whether, the Dell Technologies and Supermicro Computers server shipped to Malaysia is actually housing the NVIDIA chips bar from China. So it actually outlined a case that highlighted the role of middlemen in funneling high-end semiconductors involving Malaysia's corporates. So is this a huge damage to Malaysia's credibility? Professors, Dr. Ong Keming, if I were to direct this question to you, especially in terms of a trusted US trade partner in such a uncertain period of uncertainties. So is it possible to heighten the possibilities of trade sanctions?
Yeah, thanks. So the context of what you highlighted just now was a press conference given by the Singapore Law Minister, Shanmugam, basically highlighting the fact that some of the chips that were, that were put in server racks meant for data centers, were shipped from Singapore to Malaysia. And then from Malaysia, it may have gone to China or China-related sources or companies, which was seen to be a violation of the anti-AI the anti-AI diffusion regulations that was announced under by the Biden administration, the outgoing Biden administration last year. And this AI Diffusion Act was also announced at the same time as the entity list by the Bureau of Industry and Security under the US Commerce Department was expanded not just for Malaysia but also for Singapore as well. So I think it would have been good if the Singapore government had a more sort of like a strategic and coordinated response with Malaysia, rather than making an announcement and then creating this kind of uncertainty on the side of investors and also with some of the officials here in Malaysia at MITI. But that being said, I think it is something that some of the people who are in the data center ecosystem are already aware of, and perhaps it's a good warning for Malaysian companies and companies that are investing in the data center ecosystem to be much more careful and also protective of the eventual usage of these chips. That being said, right now there's been no policy announcement coming up from the Trump administration to say whether the policies that were announced under the Biden administration in terms of putting Malaysia and Singapore on the tier 2 list of chip restrictions, whether that will change, whether Malaysia and Singapore would be upgraded to tier 1, remain at tier 2, or remain at tier 2. I don't think we'll be downgraded to tier 3 because that will be the end of data center and other kinds of investments in Malaysia. So we need to monitor that situation closely and then work together with our neighbors to try to prevent these kinds of things from happening in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Prof. So, Mr. Jadid, so do you think this finding would actually further harm our Malaysia's advanced industries, and possible, closing up some door in terms of more bilateral trades relations?
I mean, I don't have much really more to add on this front, except that it could very well just be an isolated case, and we should just let the investigation run its course. And I think the focus should also be on ensuring that it's a transparent investigation and that there's like proper regulatory oversight, so that Malaysia's reputation remains promising. But as MITI has come up with a statement saying that they have commenced the investigation, so I think we should just let the investigation run its course.
Thanks, Mr. Jadid. Yeah, Dr. Sri, so across your experience in terms of
Can I respond to this question?
Yeah,
about the NVIDIA chip. The Singapore, after the announcement, have cast a lot of doubt about Malaysia. And so that's why there was a lot of impact, all right, to the stock market actually as well.
NationGate.
So yes, and so I think we need to be fair. If you just now, Prof said that it would be better if both sides were collaborated, shared information, and then have an announcement together. But I think the most important thing is that I think number one, the government MITI has come out to say that they are in compliance with whatever is needed by the US. And it is important that Malaysia announce that we will comply to all the requirements and all the companies will comply. But of course, there are loopholes. And then, like in Singapore, there are loopholes, and that loopholes need to be plugged. So I think it is very important that, like we say, every company should be aware that the requirement is there and you need to comply. So there is already a system of compliance, and we just have to follow that system, and anything else will need to be investigated and the holes need to be plugged and people taken to court to be charged for if they are not complying. So I think that's the key. So if Malaysia can demonstrate that enforcement, then that will put Malaysia on the good books again, I think.
Yeah, talking about that, Dr. Sri, do you have any advice for any of Malaysia's company, if they were to encounter into such a situation again? Like putting the...
Yeah, if they encounter this situation, they need to report out. Let the police or whoever investigate into the thing and not just leave it, and hope that something be overlooked or the issue gets swept under the carpet. I think, this requirement is serious and we just have to commit to it and get it, complied.
Thanks. All right. Thanks, Dr. Sri. Yeah, we have a very interesting and insightful discussion for the past 1 hour. So for the last 30 minutes, I would like to open the floor for Q&A. So if you have any questions, you feel free to post in the chat group, or if you would like to raise this question personally to any of the speakers, you can always raise your hand and I will unmute you. Right? So yeah, you can start to kick the ball of Q&A ongoing. Let me start with one of the questions posted to the groups. All right, so the question posted by Grace sounds like, do the speakers envisage the reduction of new or fresh investment from the US in light that Trump is pushing for more investment in US itself? So basically, what do you all think? Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of companies are looking at Malaysia as an alternative site, and the area as a country that can help them to mitigate risk, build resiliency, and so on, because we have proven that we can recover from COVID very strongly. We have proven that the people can deliver, the system can deliver, and so on. Okay. But however, the issue then becomes what else is the Trump 2.0 is going to happen? Are they going to implement the tariff or not? All right. And so right now, it looks like a lot of interest in the country, I mentioned earlier, but they still have to wait and see because the time is coming. And they like to see that what they say, what they predict is true. If it is true, then they will execute. If it's not true, then they will have to rethink their strategy.
All right. Yeah, Prof. Ong and Mr. Jadip. So what is your prediction in terms of the upcoming US investments under Trump's second presidency? Yeah, maybe Mr. Jadip, you can go first.
Yeah, so I think if at the moment Trump is most interested in using tariffs as an instrument of trade policy. I think if this continues, I don't necessarily think that it would, again, as we discussed earlier, it would broadly change the playing field in terms of attracting investments into Malaysia, simply because of the reputation that Malaysia has built up. And even in Trump 1.0, we saw that Malaysia wasn't really affected by his sort of aggressive trade policies. But if it takes the form of other non-tariff measures, perhaps much more aggressive subsidies for US companies to reshore into the US, but potentially that could disincentivize companies to invest in places like Malaysia. But it won't just be Malaysia that is affected by that. But also it's again important to reiterate, as as has been discussed before, that it comes down to like simple economics, like comparative advantage. Like Malaysia does have an advantage in like for instance the back end of semiconductor assembly, and the US doesn't. So even if the companies are given plenty of incentives to reshore, or go back to the US. It's still going to be prohibitively very prohibitive in terms of cost to run these facilities there. So I don't think it would alter the incentive structure very much. So I don't think we would expect again. So I think the simple answer is, as is often the case in economics, it depends.
Right, right.
Yes. Just to add two things. The first is that I don't think Trump will use the subsidy approach, because that was the approach used by Biden, and he clearly wants to distinguish himself from the Biden administration. Hence, the tariff approach will be the preferred approach. That's one. Second thing is, I think there may be short-term impact on FDIs in general around the world for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the greater policy uncertainty means that companies themselves will maybe adopt a wait and see attitude, at least for this year, before thinking about what to do, moving ahead. And this applies not just to American companies, but probably Chinese companies, European companies as well. So they do want to invest, but maybe they will hold off until there is a little bit of a clearer policy stability ecosystem. The third point I'd like to add is that what Trump is doing now basically would help realign global supply chains and probably force a lot of countries to move away from being over dependent on the US market, as big as it is. And I think it's a good reminder of what Jaideep said just now, of the need for countries like Malaysia to diversify our markets, to look for new growth areas, to look for more partners in places like the Gulf Coast countries, and maybe even Latin America through Brazil and the Mercosur countries. So yeah, it's always good to diversify.
Yeah, I think I will echo what Professor Ong was mentioning. I think Trump has personally says in the address to the Congress that the CHIP Act is lousy. The CHIP Act is should be dismantled by the US Congress. So I kind of think that talking about subsidies, it might be kind of tough. But I just want to follow up one questions when we talk about this. So do you think this tariff is efficient enough to bring job back to US? And then, in other way, reducing our job opportunity with the US company over in Malaysia, Prof?
Short answer is no, because of what others have said, what Jaideep and what Dr. Wong has said. The US just doesn't have that kind of competitive economics and also supply chain linkages.
Right. Okay, I'm picking up another questions from the floor. So I think this question was specifically directed to Dr. Sri Wong. So this is how it looks like. So there is a strong perception Malaysia is the winner from Trump administration. However, recent report from Gartner shows that we are ranked behind Vietnam for new investment as risk mitigation side. Can Dr. Sri Wong comment what is the gap in Malaysia in terms of competitions with Vietnam for the FDI?
I don't have the data, but the only thing I can think of that competitive edge of Vietnam is talent. Okay, they have more talent there, and so a lot of the companies go there because they can find the talent versus Malaysia. Okay, that's number one. And number two is that the people there are hungrier, I would call it, to try to win versus Malaysia, because we have 50 years already, and therefore the willingness to motivate or encourage more investment through incentives compared to Vietnam and Thailand and everywhere else, they are more willing to give greater incentives, for companies to invest. However, on the other flip side, we have a much stronger supply chain, and therefore, like what I tell investors who come to Malaysia and trying to decide between all the other countries, is that when you come to Malaysia, you have peace of mind to start up the factory. On the other side, you have to put in a lot more work, whether it's India, Vietnam, and so on.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sri. Yeah, if I were to kind of redirect these questions to Professor Ong and Mr. Jaideep, but putting in another different slight twist, which is what do you think about Malaysia's competency in ASEAN? How would it rank in terms of advanced industries? What do you think, and how we can actually do better? maybe Mr. Jadip, you want to go first?
I mean, I don't have the data offhand, but I think broadly speaking, I mean, I think if you look at what, for instance, YB Liu always says, we are essentially kind of second to Singapore, in the ASEAN space in a lot of areas. I mean, just taking a look at like our development trajectory as well, we pretty much have as Dr. Sri mentioned, sort of an established presence, established ecosystem in many mature industries, that countries like Vietnam and countries outside the region are also still trying to build. So we do have that advantage. But of course, whether we take it for granted or act strategically is another question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professors, yeah, do you agree
Can I
with your
just
ex-colleague that we are
uh,
second just to Singapore?
I I largely agree, but I want to add that when we look at, for example, the index of complexity in terms of the products that are being produced in Malaysia, you probably find that we are second in the region. But I think what we need to realize is that the manufacturing ecosystem is important not just for semiconductors. We also need to move up the value chain in other areas of manufacturing as well. It could be as simple as food manufacturing or manufacturing of different agricultural products, right? If let's say we are able to show that we can move further downstream, increase efficiency, bring in more sustainable ways of manufacturing that can reduce the usage of electricity and water, for example. All of these are ways of enhancing the larger manufacturing ecosystem in Malaysia. And I wanted to highlight this because I don't want the conversation to be overly focused on just the semiconductor sector, as important as it is. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. on gamings on this. Yeah, I think there's another questions popping up, which I think we have partially answered. It sounds like everyone can see Malaysia has a strategic ambiguity with China in areas such as BRICS, the ECRLs, Belt and Road Initiative, and smaller cities. So wouldn't all this impact on Malaysia's traditional, reputation with the US investors, especially in those high-tech industries? Will they be actually? I think the questions should be reframed in such a way. Would the US investor skeptical on Malaysia's because of all this strategic ambiguity?
Yeah, maybe I just add to that, and then Dr. Sri Wong can answer that lah. If let's say Malaysia goes ahead, we implement the second 5G network, it's given to a Chinese company. Will that impact the way the US investors, including the semiconductor players, will it impact their sort of like outlook on the investment climate in Malaysia?
Is this a question to Dr. Sri?
Yeah, question for me.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
All right.
Just to add to the question.
Yeah. I think this will be an issue, I guess, with the government of the US, maybe President Trump. I think for most of the corporate, they are looking at mainly global competitiveness, and if that's going to help in making them more globally competitive, I don't think they will put that agenda as an issue unless it is threatening national security. So if there is an issue of national security, then I don't think we have it's a moot point already. I mean, the US companies will probably follow whatever the government in the US say. But if it is not, then it's all going to be pure what is best for each company in Malaysia, and whether this infrastructure will even help them to be more competitive. I think that's how they would look at it.
All right. Anything to talk about from Mr. Jaideep and Professor Ong pertaining to Dr. Sri Wong responses?
Nothing much really. Just to, I guess, to put it in context that there's often this perception that Malaysia is over dependent on over reliant on China. But I think if we take a more nuanced nuanced look at the trade and investment ecosystem, it's not really the case. Yes, China is Malaysia's largest trading partner, but China is almost every country's largest trading partner just because of its size, because of its proximity. It just, because of its closeness to the region. Many countries have the US, China is the largest trading partner. And in fact, if you look at the share of intensity of trade with China, like the share of Malaysia's China trade to total Malaysian trade is actually less than, it's about 16% last year. It's actually lower than the trade intensity of Japan with China, Australia with China. Many other countries have actually trade more intensely with China than Malaysia does. Yet the concern always seems to come back to Malaysia, that Malaysia is over dependent on China. And I think even from an FDI perspective, the things like the ECRL were renegotiated several times by successive administrations. So it wasn't like there was no agency on the Malaysian part, to renegotiate when the terms weren't favorable. So, and also from a foreign direct investment perspective, the US is still a bigger player, in Malaysia than China. So I think it's also important to just kind of put the question into perspective and address the sort of debunk the idea that Malaysia is over dependent on China.
Yeah, Prof. Ong, so Malaysia's dependent on China. Is it real or is it just a gestures? Or your final comments, yeah, Prof. Ong. You're mute.
Sorry, I think the question is not so much Malaysia's dependence on China, but the perception that Malaysia is gravitating more towards the Chinese ecosystem. And I think Prime Minister Anwar is doing his best to have this balancing act. It's just that I think from a strategic perspective, sometimes this balancing act can seem a little bit unbalanced, especially when we don't see the longer run perspective, and also we don't see the kind of extra benefits that we can get with regards to us making quite a number of concessions to the Chinese government as well as Chinese companies. So, we are not over dependent on China, but maybe a bit of rebalancing in terms of that perception would be helpful for Malaysia.
Thank you. Right. I just want to ask the floor, if you have any questions, I just want to remind the floor, if you have any questions you want to ask directly here in these sessions, you can always raise your hand and I will unmute you, then you can directly ask to any of the speakers. All right. Yeah, if there's anyone who would want to raise your hand, calling 5, 4. Seems there's no people. Seems everyone prefer typing their questions in the chat box. Okay, then I'll pick another one. So I think this question would probably also be directed to Dr. Sri Wong. So how does Malaysia existing focus on outsourced semiconductor assembly and tests in its E&E sectors influence the potential demand for chip design, considering the recent partnership with ARM? Specifically, are there enough companies operating within Malaysia that are likely to transition towards or invest in chip design capabilities due to this deal?
Oh, I can only hope so. I mean, in terms of offset, we have about 4 Malaysian companies. The rest are multinational. In terms of design, I think we have like 30 plus design companies, out of which I think probably 5 or 6 Malaysian companies. And out of that 5, 6, only one that is capable of doing an IC design product. The others are trying to get to get competency and talent in order for them to do design of IC product. So it will be a challenge for Malaysia to create new companies who are willing to go into IC design of products, like what the aspiration of when Malaysia partner with ARM. So that will be a challenge, I feel. And therefore, in order for us to encourage and get that competency quickly, we either get, I mentioned earlier, ARM engineers, or we allow the best engineers around the world to come to Malaysia and help Malaysia to do it. So Malaysia need a policy that says that I need to allow these engineers to come in and help Malaysia's engineers to get there quickly now that we have this partnership. So that is something for the Malaysian government to look at it and see how best they can do this and make it happen. Then you have to then encourage more of our competent engineers who are all based in MNC to come out and start up and have good support from the our GLICs and so on to fund them to get out. It's a very expensive game. It's not a cheap game.
Thanks, Dr. Swiss. So talking about when you're talking about chip design, I think one of the most important aspect is whatever you design, whatever you fabricate, there must be a market for you to sell it, to gain profit, and then to start the whole positive revenue generating loops. So I think one of the key questions that we have over here is whether with this collaboration with is there a market for us to actually sell this kind of AI chip? So I would like to direct these questions to all three panelists, especially when we talk about not just talking about AI design, but how Malaysia positionings in selling or and penetrating into this kind of markets.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. In order to do any chip design of a product, you really need a market. You really need somebody to work with you very closely so that by the time you finish your chip design and your product, there is a ready market for it straight away. But if you do it and then trying to look for a market, you may not design it perfectly that the market will accept your product. So one of the possible solutions to this will be to work closely with one of the customers who says the easiest way would be to design a chip that is enhanced version of the current chip that they want to put it into their next generation product. We design it and then we drop it into their socket. So that way, then it is a lot safer. And if you want to do AI chip, I think you have to also find solutions in that light. So currently, I know we are working on a project in Malaysia to design an AI solution and a kit so that all the Malaysian, we can provide solutions to both industrial needs as well as education. Okay. And so the Raspberry Pi kit that is focusing on IoT, we are trying to develop a similar kit, but for AI. And that is designed here and that can hopefully help the whole education system from primary all the way to university, as well as make it applicable to industry. And to complete that whole chain, then you need to have a Malaysian design HEYA chip. And therefore, if we can do that, then we can become similar to Raspberry Pi, but for AI. So that's our goal is hopefully that aspiration can be achieved, either this year or next year. We are on the way.
Very, very interesting. So yeah, but I think I also want to redirect this question to Professor Ong and Mr. Jadid. So collaborations in terms of macro markets perspective, is it realistic? Yeah, maybe Mr. Jadid, you want to go first?
Oh no, please. I actually have nothing to add on this. I mean, I think it goes back to what Dato Sri said about the lack of talent, which I think is also a question that has been raised in the chat. That if we probably would need to import talent from abroad. And I think that should be the move of the government to plug the gap in the skills gap. But that I think especially from India, there's a lot of interest, in terms of attracting like India has a large supply of engineers, but they want to work here, but they may not necessarily have the sort of administrative permission to work here, and that also prevents, for instance, technology transfer and learning by doing, which impedes the growth of the sector.
Just one small thing to add. I think the policy makers, tend to jump to conclusions in terms of going from, licensing the IP for chip design to being able to, produce our own chips in a advanced foundry. Sometimes that jump is easier to put on paper, but much harder to execute, right? So we may have to temper down our expectations and maybe focus on trying to develop capacity and capabilities in very specific segments of the chip design ecosystem. So, taking subcontracts and enhancing our value proposition first, before we even think about being able to complete an entire sort of like even enhancement of a chip design by ourselves, right? So if let's say we have a more gradual and graded approach in terms of achieving small steps, then it may be more realistic for us to get towards the end goal.
Right. Thanks, Prof. So another question, I think directed to you, Prof. Ong. So do you think policies by Malaysian government, like by the Americans H1B visas to attract foreign talents will be feasible in terms of our country context? Do you think we need to have these specific talent visas to attract the talent needed for our industrial booms?
Yeah, so quickly, the answer is yes. For those who don't know, H1B visas are visas that are issued by the US government specifically for workers in critical industries, specifically the tech industry, and they are sort of like they are lapped up, and they are sort of like there's a too much demand for it among the tech companies in the US. So that ecosystem, I think, is going to be even shrunk down further if, let's say, certain anti-immigration policies continue to be implemented by Trump. Although he has been publicly supportive of the H1B visa, we don't really see that in action. For Malaysia, we have said that we will want to allow foreign graduates of universities in Malaysia to continue to stay in Malaysia, especially those in critical occupation sectors. And there are currently two pathways. MIDA has been named as one of the agencies that can process and approve these visas. And then there's also a graduate visa program under the Ministry of Higher Education that's being processed by EMGS to allow foreign graduates of Malaysian universities to stay on to work for 1 year. And then maybe later on, after that, they would be able to have enough experience to qualify for a job that allows them to get a professional visa, to get an expatriate visa, where the starting wages is about 5,000 ringgit. In the semiconductor sector, I know for a fact that, for example, some companies that are part of the IC design park in Puchong under the CDAC initiative in Selangor, they are being paid a starting salary of 6,000 ringgit by some companies who have hired about 100 or 200 people there. So that is a possible option, and we may want to try to use this opportunity to attract talent even from the US that are coming to the region because of the situation in the US, because of the lack of H1B visa. So all these are opportunities for us to get a hold of good talent.
Yeah, top-up questions, Prof. Ong. So how could we actually compete with our neighbors, which is Singapore, which have a very high currency exchange rate with regards to Malaysia's? Other than Singapore's having a very high living cost if you were to rent a room or a house. What is our competitive edge?
So I think we can compete and also complement Singapore. If let's say we can develop enough good value propositions in terms of companies that can train and then hire some of these workers, that will grow the IC design ecosystem. Inevitably, some of them will end up going to Singapore because of better wages. But then some of them may choose to come back to Malaysia. If let's say we offer better promotion pathways, we offer more international exposure, we offer better living conditions in terms of being able to live in a bigger accommodation, right? So there are different value propositions, and maybe the Johor Singapore Special Economic Zone can be part of the solution, where the larger ecosystem can be grown for both sides of the border.
Thanks, Prof. Darusri, so
Yes.
across your experience in terms of managing one of the largest MNC in Malaysia, what is your take in terms of our talents gap, in order for us to advance in the semiconductors or even other advanced industries?
So other than looking at the H-1B visa strategy of the US that have brought them to where they are today in terms of helping US achieve the kind of technology that they are doing through the H-1B visa, not looking too far south, Singapore did the same. Okay, they did it through their ASEAN scholarship, and they get the best cream of the crop in ASEAN to all study over there and then work in Singapore. And that's how Singapore can be so good. I mean, in everything that they are doing. And Malaysia, needs to do the same. We get the best of the cream of the crop of from other countries like maybe Central Asia, from Iran or from other countries to come to Malaysia. Even Vietnam, we can also attract them to come, or Philippines or India, for them to come and do the work that we wanted them to do. For your information, we have about 15% of our talent leaving the country every year. So we have a hole. That hole needs to be filled. And therefore, this is one of the ways to fill up that hole. But to fill up that hole, you want the best talent. And we got to find the best talent other than those who have gone to Singapore. We find it for other countries to backfill what we have lost. And that will, I know that one of the concerns of the government is it will deprive Malaysians of a job. Actually, you look back all the examples of these countries, they are creating more jobs than depriving Malaysians of a job. And you can see that even in Taiwan, they're coming to Malaysia to hire our people. Same thing, because they think that we have good talent, but if once they are taken away, then it's very difficult to backfill it.
Interesting, right? Mr. Jadip, do you have any further top up in pertaining to this question?
No, I have nothing to add. I think they've perfectly encapsulated what needs to be said about the issue.
Right. I think the talents landscape is one of the biggest issues over in Malaysia. Leveraging my own experience in terms of industries, we probably will need to be more industrial focused in terms of our academics design, and also to be a little bit more open, to be really open up for foreign talents, like what mentions by Prof and Industries, so that we can have superpositions of growth within in between our foreign talents and our local talents. So yeah, so I just want to ask to the floor if there is any last round of questions. We probably can take one last question before we end the sessions. It's 9:58. Is there any? Seems like there's no further questions. All right. Okay. If there's no further questions, then I think our sessions will end here. Once again, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Ong Kian Ming, Mr. Jadip Singh, and Dr. Sri Wong Siu for spending your time. It's late night, it's 10 p.m. now. Thanks for spending your off work time with us to provide such a insightful sharings, analysis, and also your perspective in terms of US Malaysia's bilateral relations, trade risks, and tech opportunities. Right. Thank you so much to our three subject matter experts panelists. And I think the sessions will end here. Thank you, and good night to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Right.
Thank you.